This is where even the most experienced pilots face moments that can change everything in seconds. Across the United States, a handful of airports push aviation to its absolute limits. These landings demand precision, discipline, and nerve, and each one reveals just how unforgiving flying can become. 5. Aspen, Pitkin County Airport. Deep in the Colorado Rockies, Aspen Airport operates in an environment that immediately challenges both aircraft and pilot. Sitting at nearly 8,000 feet above sea level, the air is significantly thinner than at most airports. That detail matters more than most people realize. Thin air reduces engine efficiency and weakens lift, forcing aircraft to behave very differently during landing. Pilots must adjust speed, descent rate, and timing with extreme accuracy. But altitude is only part of the equation. The airport is surrounded by steep mountain terrain, leaving only one viable approach path. It is not a straight descent. Pilots must execute a curved entry, navigating through narrow gaps while maintaining strict alignment. Weather adds another layer of risk. Sudden downdrafts and shifting winds can destabilize an aircraft in seconds. Here is the critical part. There is very little room for correction once the approach begins. Only specially trained pilots are authorized to land here, and even they face frequent delays due to rapidly changing conditions. But if you think mountains are the ultimate challenge, the next airport proves isolation can be just as dangerous. 4. Juneau International Airport. Juneau, Alaska, is unlike any other capital city in the United States. It is completely cut off from the national road network, meaning aviation is not a convenience. It is a necessity. That makes this airport vital, but also extremely demanding. The landscape defines the challenge. Mountains rise sharply around the airport, while open water borders the approach path. Pilots must navigate through tight corridors with very limited flexibility. Now consider the weather. Juneau experiences dense fog, heavy rain, and rapidly shifting visibility. Conditions can deteriorate in moments, forcing pilots to rely almost entirely on instruments during critical phases of flight. And here is where it becomes even more intense. If a landing attempt fails, executing a missed approach is far from simple. Terrain restrictions leave little room for maneuvering, increasing pressure during decision-making. Pilots must remain calm, precise, and fully focused. Yet even with all these challenges, there is another airport that pushes altitude and risk even further. 3. Telluride Regional Airport. Telluride takes everything seen in Aspen and pushes it to a higher extreme. At over 9,000 feet above sea level, it stands as one of the highest commercial airports in North America. But elevation is only the beginning. The runway sits on a narrow plateau, surrounded by steep cliffs that drop sharply on both ends. There is no gradual terrain transition. It is a sudden edge that alone changes how pilots approach landing. Wind conditions here are highly unpredictable. Strong crosswinds and sudden turbulence can develop quickly, especially as air flows over surrounding mountains. Imagine stabilizing an aircraft under those conditions, knowing there is almost no margin for deviation. Here is the key difference. Go-arounds are extremely limited. Once a pilot commits to landing, options become restricted. There is little opportunity to abort and try again safely. This turns every approach into a high-stakes decision. But natural challenges are only part of the story, because the next airport introduces a different kind of pressure entirely. One built not by geography, but by control and restriction. 2. Ronald Reagan, Washington National Airport. Positioned just minutes from the center of Washington, D.C., this airport operates under some of the most tightly controlled airspace in the world. There are no mountains here, no extreme altitude. Instead, the challenge comes from precision. Pilots must follow a highly specific flight path along the Potomac River, avoiding restricted zones tied to national security. The approach includes sharp turns at low altitude, requiring full manual control and exact timing. There is no flexibility. Every movement is monitored, Every deviation matters, and the margin for error is almost non-existent. But despite this intense level of control, the most unforgiving airport on this list relies on something far simpler and far less forgiving. Juneau 1. Key West International Airport. At first glance, Key West feels calm, open, and almost effortless. Clear skies, ocean views, and a relaxed atmosphere suggest an easy landing. That assumption does not last long. The runway here is significantly shorter than those found at major airports across the United States. This immediately limits how aircraft approach, descend, and stop. There is no extra distance to absorb mistakes. Pilots must land with absolute precision, touch down too far along the runway, and there may not be enough space to stop safely. Approach too fast, and braking becomes critical. Approach too slow, and stability is compromised during the final seconds. Everything must align perfectly. Now add the surrounding environment. The airport is bordered by water, which creates constantly shifting wind patterns. These winds are not always predictable. They can change direction and intensity without warning, especially during coastal weather shifts. This forces pilots to make continuous adjustments during the most sensitive phase of flight. Here is what makes it even more demanding. There is no buffer, no extended runway, no forgiving margin that allows for correction after touchdown. Every movement, every second, carries weight. Unlike mountain airports, where terrain dominates the challenge, Key West strips everything down to fundamentals: speed, timing, control, and when any one of those elements is even slightly off, the consequences happen immediately. It is this simplicity combined with zero tolerance for error that places Key West at the top of this list. Now step back for a moment. What do all these airports have in common? It is not just danger. It is the way each one exposes a different limitation of aviation itself. In Aspen and Telluride, altitude and terrain test how aircraft perform in thin air and unstable conditions. In Juneau, isolation and weather push pilots to rely entirely on instruments and judgment. In Washington, strict airspace control demands absolute precision under constant monitoring. And in Key West, the challenge becomes raw execution with no room for recovery. Each airport reveals a different truth. Flying is not only about advanced technology or powerful aircraft. It is about human decision-making under pressure. It is about training, discipline, and the ability to remain calm when conditions become unpredictable. And here is something most passengers never think about. Every time an aircraft lands at one of these airports, a complex chain of calculations, adjustments, and decisions has already taken place long before the wheels touch the ground. Pilots are constantly reading the environment. Wind speed, air density, visibility, aircraft weight. They are making micro-adjustments every second. One small correction can be the difference between a smooth landing and a critical situation. Now consider this. Thousands of flights operate safely every day across the United States, including at these airports. That consistency is not accidental. It is the result of strict training standards, advanced systems, and continuous monitoring. But the risk never fully disappears. It is managed, controlled, reduced, never eliminated. That is what makes these airports so fascinating. They sit at the edge of what is possible in commercial aviation. They show how far systems have evolved and how much still depends on human precision. And they remind us that even in a highly advanced industry, the margin for error can still be incredibly small. These 5 airports reveal the reality behind modern aviation. Precision matters. Environment matters. And every landing is a calculated risk, managed through skill and discipline. If you found this breakdown insightful, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe for more high-level aviation content. Which of these airports would you trust the most to land safely, and which one would make you think twice?